So let's do lesson 10A. In the next preview assignment in the next class, you're going to need to be able to create a table of values for a function given in verbal or symbolic forms. So creating a table of values given an equation. In Worksheet 8C, we used some technology. We created an exponential graph. Here, we're going to explore how to determine the values of an exponential function using a table. To make a table, we must first know how to calculate exponential values. We've got to have an idea of what it looks like, how we get our answers, and we'll be plugging a lot of stuff in our calculators, but we still need to always remember reasonableness. Whole number exponents represent repeated multiplication. That's a big deal to write down. It is repeated multiplication, and it's a repeating of the base number. We can do it by hand, on a calculator, many types of devices, but you need to find a key like one of these on your calculator, or maybe something different on your calculator. So you might have to search the internet for your calculator's button or look at the manual, but you need to find what's going to be on your calculator to compute exponential. Before we get started with our calculators, we want to do this without a calculator. Remember, it's repeated multiplication. So this base number 3 is going to get repeated 4 times using multiplication. 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, 4 of them. And then you're going to put them together. It doesn't matter which way you multiply, they just all need to be multiplied together, like 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 9 is, well, either way we go, we're getting 81. Before we move on to completing the table, I'd encourage you to go ahead and now that you know 3 to the 4 is worth 81, practice on your calculator to get this to work. You might need to punch 3 and then the caret and then 4 and then maybe equals. Is that what makes 81 appear on your screen? Or maybe you need to punch 3 and then the button like X to the Y and then a 4 and then an equals. Is that what makes 81 appear on your screen? Right now, take time to get 3 to the 4th plugged into your computer calculator so that 81 shows up as your answer. And you've got the process because we're about to replicate that. If you have not already looked at questions 2 and 3, at least, and you could go on to 4, but at least look at 2 and 3, hit pause to do that, and then come back and we'll work on them together. So now it asks us to create a table of values for this exponential function. And we're going to evaluate it. And in addition to that, we're going to complete the table for that function as well as y equals 2x function. And we're going to use these defined values for x. I'm going to start with this one. In other words, we're going to have y equals 2 times whatever our x is, and in this case it's a 0. And so I get 0. That's why 0 is written right here. I'm going to repeat the process. 2 times, well, now it's 1. And I'm going to keep going down the page. So now we have completed the table for y equals 2x. And I'll remind you, it's x to the 1. And that means we're going to have a linear equation. I want to go now to our y equals 2 to the x power. I'm going to write those down here like the first one is y to the x, and our first y, our y is 2 to the x, and our first x is 0. So 2 to the 0. This one's a good one to memorize, but if you don't know it or don't have it memorized right now, remember we practiced on your calculator. So you know how to plug this in, do that, and trust your answer that it shows up to be a 1, which is already listed in our table. We're going to keep repeating this process. The next one is 2 to the first power. Well, 2 to the first power is going to be 2. Then y equals 2 squared. I can use repeated multiplication and get 4, or if I want to type it in my calculator, I've got that skill too. 2 cubed, 2 times 4 times 2 is 8. And actually, it's just going to keep multiplying times 2 and multiplying times 2. Question 3 says, describe how the values increase for the two functions. And I want to start back at our linear. Looking at our linear, we go 2 to 4 to 6. Well, what's happening? From 0 to 2, I went up 2. From 2 to 4, I went up 2. From 4 to 6, and then, so all of these in the y equals 2x in the linear, to go up, I added 2. But looking at the exponential, how do I get from a 1 to a 2? Well, I can add 1, or I might want to notice that if I've multiplied the 1 by 2, that's where I go. 2 to 4, I can add 2, but I'm trying to look for a pattern, and if I take 2 times 2, so it looks like everything is getting doubled. The last thing I'd like to point out is even though we use the same x values, and boy, that is definitely hiding the numbers. Even though we use the same, anyway, never mind, we use the same x values. I want you to look at where we landed, where we ended up. The linear ended up with a value of 10. The exponential ended up with a value of 32, substantially higher. If you have not completed question 4, now is the time to go ahead and work on it, and then come back and we'll work on it together. Another skill you're going to need to know for your quantitative reasoning or your Math 1332 lessons, you're going to need to create a table of values given a verbal description. The description is going to be about rabbits and their monthly mating and growth patterns. But for question 4, let's consider a different one. You're trying to save money for a trip, so here comes all the verbal, and you're going to take it in a few months. You want to start off easy, saving $1 per week. But you know you're not going to save a whole lot of money that way, so what you've decided to do is this. Each week, you're going to try to save as much money as you had the previous 2 weeks combined. Make huge note, that's what we're going to try to do. You want to know how much money you're going to have by the time you leave for your trip, so you create a table to track your savings. As with any table, you got to think on it, you got to play around with it, you got to look at it, make it make sense. Here we go. The two things I want to point out, we were going to start by saving $1 a week. Then they thought, you know what, let me combine the previous 2 weeks and we'll go from there. So starting at week 1, we don't have a prior week and we don't have 2 prior weeks. So we have no money saved from 2 weeks before, no money that we're going to be including in our savings from last week. All we can do is say, I'm saving $1 this week. And I'm even going to kind of do this because then what's the total amount saved for week 1? Nothing plus $1, $1. Well, let's see if this works from here. Week 2. So week 2, we are now just 2 weeks out. So there's nothing to still save just yet because we can't combine or save from the previous 2 weeks because we haven't gone past 2 weeks. So we still have nothing for 2 weeks before. This time we do have a 1 week before. And so notice that the 1 week is going to become the 2 weeks value. And the this week is going to become the past week. And so these arrows that are already drawn on there are going to be very helpful because then what's the amount we're going to save this week? Well, we don't have past week or past 2 weeks to combine in. Wait, I'm sorry, we do. We have 1 past week to combine in. So this past week, we're going to end up saving $1, and I'm not saying that right. This dollar is from this week. These are from the week before, from 2 weeks before. We don't have any from 2 weeks before. We have some from 1 week before, and we have the contribution for this week. So adding these up, I'm going to get a total of, so far for this week, the total amount saved, $2. We're going to keep doing this, and if the first time you read it, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, this is a great time to hit pause and go fill out the rest of the document, the table, or at least parts 3 and 4, weeks 3 and 4. So before we go on to line 3, I want to make another check right here. I guess I'll go ahead and do it with this color. We have the 2 weeks before, the 1 week before, how much we're saving this week. I just want to put those together and make sure that the total amount saved so far plus the total amount I saved this week, it's just going to be a whole lot of lines on this poor little chart, is still sitting at $2. So now let's shift everything over. The 1 week before now becomes the 2 week before. What we saved last week is now going to come, what we saved this week is now next week going to be 1 week past. And so how much are we going to try to save this week? This week, remember, we're trying to save the previous 2 weeks combined. So the 1 and the 1 gets us the 2. I'm cracking up at all my colors. And so what I have total amount saved was $2. With this week, I'm going to add 2 to that. So my new total, in other words, my week 3 total, is $4. Again, shift over 1 week to now become the second week because we're now in week 4. This week becomes last week, which is $2. And so what am I going to save this week? I'm going to save $3. And if I'm going to save $3, oh, let's get another color. I had $4 from last week, put it with $3 from this week. And so for week 4, I'm going to save, or total amount I have saved is $7. Continuing, the last week, which was 1 week, has now become 2 weeks past. This week becomes 1 week past. And these two amount to what I'm going to save this week. And so what I had saved last week, what I'm saving this week, now puts my total at $12. If you're needing to do this by yourself, make sure you are fully seeing where it is. You can replay this video. You can erase what you have and start all over, but now we're looking at week 6. And for week 6, we got one more time to do the shuffle. 1 week ago becomes 2 weeks ago. This week becomes 1 week ago. And the verbal part said we're going to add those up and get this week's contribution. So that means what we had saved, what we're going to save this week, puts us at the end of 6 weeks at $20. Now I'm looking at parts A, B, C, and D, and I have busted on through those points. Looking at part A, it says, why does the first row have the labeled list, no dollars, for what has been saved for 2 weeks? And to reiterate that or visit that again, first week, we haven't been going long enough to have 2 weeks passed. And we haven't been going long enough to have 1 week passed. But by the second week, we still haven't completed 2 full weeks, but we do have 1 week that went by that we can't include. And by the time we get to week 3, we're blowing and going. We've got 2 weeks before, 1 week before, and what we're doing this week in a total. And wash, rinse, and repeat. Part B, why does the table have columns for the 2 weeks prior the current week's savings? Well, we got to get started somewhere. So this gets us started on week 1. This is going to make our second week, and then we can just start shifting from there on the 2 weeks prior and the 1 week prior. Part C says how much money should be saved in week 2, and then what are the total savings at the end of week 2. So what we should save is $1, and then the total savings by the end is $2. Finally, Part D asks, how much total money will you have saved at the end of the 6th week? And as you can see here, our total amount of money that we will have saved is $20. This concludes Lesson 10A. You need to look at your syllabus to see if we have more lessons that you have that are due this week. If you have more due, let's get to working on those. And if you don't have any more due, take a picture of these on Cam Scanner or some other resource and upload these before the deadline. We'll see you at another lesson.